Now this video might turn into quite a long one. I want to start looking deeper into the archetypes as requested by some of you members. And thank you, by the way, for continuing to subscribe. I really do appreciate it. And I might as well ask while I'm at it. If you fancy sharing the link that, basically to put it out on your social media, if we can get more people subscribing, obviously that brings in more income for me, which is all good, but it also means I have then more time to be able to do this because I don't have to focus my attention on earning an income when I can get paid for talking. Fantastic. Want to look at archetypes, give you a specific example of how archetype works, but also give an explanation of how you can use this as sort of a roadmap for archetypes. No, an index for archetypes, a tool, here we go, a tool for understanding archetypes. Now this is the Qabalistic Tree of Life, and the study of this is a lifelong study. It's one of those things which I'm so mystical. I study Kabbalah. I've been studying the Kabbalah for 40 years. All well and good. There are multiple types of Kabbalah, and there are multiple schools within the different types of Kabbalah. And so if you meet two Kabbalists from different schools and different things, they may well have different variations on this and tell you an entirely different thing. And that's where it starts to get really confusing. I'm going to go with the Western magical tradition, which is largely based on the Christian Kabbalah rather than the Jewish Kabbalah. However, we use an awful lot of Jewish and Hebrew phrases and a lot of symbolism that the Western magicians think of. That's very mystical and Kabbalistic. And then you pop over to Israel and you discover what people over here have been practicing in dark, mysterious lodges of magic. Actually, it's just bog standard Saturday Judaism. And of course, people don't know, because unless you have actively religiously Jewish people coming into the lodge and contact with people who actually do that stuff as a standard religious practice, a lot of this stuff actually looks like it's very mystical and magical, and it's just Judaism. So there's a lot of overlap between these things. I'm going to go with the one that I know. There's lots of different variations, and don't take what I say as hard fact or the only representation of this material, because there's lots and lots of interpretations. It's one of the things about Kabbalists is they never agree on anything most of the time. Now, I want to give you an easy way by which to understand this, and it's a number of books. And these books will really keep you busy for a while, and will be pretty much the only thing. If you want a full course in magic and archetypes, then these are the only books you'll ever need. And an internet connection with the ability to look up every sentence that you don't understand, which will be pretty much every sentence you read. Well, number one on the list is 777 and other Kabbalistic writings by Aleister Crowley. This is actually, I've just got a new one, because the other one I've had so many years. It has travelled with me everywhere I go. It has been my go-to for so many things. It's fallen apart. So I've just got a new one. Now, this is actually 3 books in one. The first one is about the mathematics and the meanings of different numbers and stuff like that. It's very abstract and esoteric, and I suspect if it's the first point of entry into this material, you'll look at that and go, I have no idea what this all means. Don't worry about it. Read through it anyway, because you might pick up a few bits and pieces. Now, the mainstay of the book, if I just turn into it, it's all these pages. I just hold that up to the camera so you can see. It's all these pages of tables, lovely, lovely, reassuring, comforting tables. Now, what you'll see on here is each table has 32 lines in it. Now, lines 1 to 10 correspond to 1, 2, 3, the Sephira, and then the subsequent 11 to 32 are the paths that connect these Sephira in between. So if I want to know, for example, attributions of this one here, which is Hod, this is the 8th Sephira, I would simply go to my tables and look at line 8 in each of the columns. So it would tell me which Egyptian gods are attributed here, which Hindu gods, which precious stone, which plant, all those kind of things. This is not fully comprehensive. This is Aleister Crowley's sort of useful outline of key correspondences. But it's fairly easy to memorize this if you're doing this a lot. But once you know these correspondences, it's much easier then to remember what they are and then you'll know what the others are, because as you're seeing these different things, you think, oh, that's just like such and such. That would go here. So that's what that book is very, very useful for. We have another one, which this is actually a more recent production. This is from Stephen Skinner. And if you're into all the magic and mysticism stuff, anything with Stephen Skinner's name on it, and it's Stephen with a PH, anything with his name on it, just buy it. Don't hesitate, just buy it. There's one thing I do find a little sticky point. Feng Shui, the popularization in the Western world of Feng Shui, it was very, very fashionable back in the 90s. That was Skinner's fault. He was the one who went and found the Feng Shui system, translated it all, and started publishing it over here. Next thing you know, everyone's gone Feng Shui crazy. He was responsible for that. Putting that aside, every other book, apart from his Feng Shui stuff, every other book with his name on it, absolutely just buy it. Don't even hesitate. Now, this one isn't a reading book. It's much like 777. It's just lots and lots of pages, try and get that on the screen, lots of pages of lovely, lovely, comforting, reassuring tables and lists. And this works in a very, very similar way. Now, some of these are Qabalistic, so they'll directly attribute here. But actually, he's got all of the comparative religions and all the other magical systems in there too. And it is quite a huge body of work and is absolutely indispensable. And this is the Complete Magician's Tables by Stephen Skinner. And then the other one is 777 and Other Qabalistic Writings by Aleister Crowley. Oh, by the way, if you don't want to buy that, you'll find it online. He died ages ago, and this is now out of print. Well, it's no in print, but it's out of copyright. That's what I'm trying to say. So you'll find PDFs and stuff for this online. Let's just see that he's on the phone. Now, the next one, The Book of Thoth, The Book of Thoth, authored by Aleister Crowley. Now, this is essentially his opus. This is one of the most information-dense books you are ever going to read, and it's like Gregory Bateson. You can't really read it; you have to study it, because literally every paragraph you'll be looking up. Okay, what does that word mean? Who's that he's referring to? What does that mean? And so it's quite slow going in trying to actually interpret what is being written here, because unless you've got the depth of knowledge of the material he's referring to, it's going to be very hard to understand what he's talking about. So this is why you need an internet connection, and Wikipedia helps as you go through this. Get the accompanying tarot deck that goes with this. Get the large cards, much better than the standard pocket size. And this is essentially a description of the tarot symbolism and the archetypes that are utilized in tarot. Absolutely superb. Every time I have reread this, I've learned something new because of the information density within the book. I say it is possibly the most information dense book I possess. And this is The Book of Thoth. It's not pronounced Thoth, by Aleister Crowley. Absolutely superb. And then the other one, and this is the abridged version, and you can see the size of it. The full version, amazingly, because it's like 20 volumes of like encyclopedia-sized books, it's all been audio transcribed, audio-scribed, and you'll find it all on YouTube or on LibriVox, and it is absolutely amazing. The audio version is definitely easier than reading through this. Now, J.G. Fraser, The Golden Bough, absolute cornerstone book in comparative religious studies and archetypes. People know all about the hero's journey. They don't know this. This came long before Hero's Journey, and essentially what Fraser did is he appointed lots and lots of people to go and collect stories from all around the world, every folk story known to man, and document them. Now, admittedly, not everyone that collected those stories actually went to the places and collected the stories from the source. Some of them were made up. And so, unfortunately, there's a lot of criticism of Fraser because the fact-checking. So there are some examples within the Golden Bough that aren't actually true. But the majority of the collection of the stories are obviously collected from source. And what Fraser was doing was pointing out the commonality that seems to run through Aboriginal folk stories and Cornish fishermen and the fisher wives, and the similarity between it is remarkable. Golden Bough, absolutely a go-to book for understanding the archetypal nature of stories and metaphors and all that kind of stuff, and spirituality and all those things. So that's just the abridged version. The full version is enormous, enormous. So those are ones I would recommend you get hold of and start using as reference points rather than trying to read them cover to cover. It's probably the best way about it. Now, what we're going to look at for our purposes of this video is we're going to look at some of the attributions of Hod. So what I'm going to go do, I'm going to go to 777, and I'm going to go to the first page of the tables of correspondences, and I'm going to look at row 8. And in terms of the planetary attributions, this is the sphere of the planet Mercury. Okay, so not necessarily the physical, actual bodily planet, but the Mercury as in its mystical, astrological, all of those esoteric attributions that are attributed to Mercury. That goes in there. So if you want a little bit of an understanding of Hod, look up the astrological meanings and influences exerted by Mercury in the world of astrology. Remember, I don't believe a word of this as any objective fact. I don't think that planet whizzing round the sun as it does exerts any influence whatsoever. However, generations and generations of people since time immemorial have. And the stories of the planets and of astrology has shaped human culture. It has shaped our evolution, and most of all has shaped our language. And we'll get into that thing about how Mercury has massively shaped our language, and how this archetype has even shaped how you do business. But we'll be getting to that. So I go along to the next one. What does it mean in English? Well, that translates as splendor, is what that Hod actually translates to. I'm skipping a lot of these. The tarot card attributions, the 4 8s would be attributed in there as well, because it's the 8, so the 8s would go in there. Do excuse the seagulls above me here. Selection of Egyptian gods. Number 8 here is Anubis, but actually primarily it's Thoth. The Book of Thoth. Oh, no, that's not. That one's the Book of Thoth. If we look at the colours, okay, there's 4 colour scales: King scale, Queen scale, Prince scale, Princess scale. For our purposes as esoteric explorers, magicians, whatever you want to call yourself, we work in Queen scale. I know, I think, what the hell are you talking about? We just work in Queen scale. This is already drawn in Queen scale, so what's the colour? It's orange. There's other colours too for the other 3 scales, but it gets too confusing. Egyptian gods would be Hermes, would be attributed there. Hindu deity, Hanuman, that's the monkey god. The 40 Buddhist meditations, which one would be attributed there? Analysis into the 4 elements. Know nothing about Buddhism. Animals, real and imaginary. It would be the hermaphrodite and the jackal. Plants would be moly and Anhelonium lewini. Precious stones, opal, especially, and we could go on. And it goes into all sorts of other things as well. Archangels, angels, orders of beings, mystical things. Loads and loads and loads of stuff. So, that's how we would use that as the point of reference. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to consider the Greek god Hermes, who is attributed here. Now, I'll pull up on the screen, I'll do this in the edit, some images of Hermes so you can see who he was, or is, who knows. Just because we've been replaced all the gods with another one doesn't mean the older ones are any less real. Just saying. Hermes, so he was a Greek Olympian deity. Importantly, he was the messenger of the gods. Remember that detail. Hermes was the messenger of the gods. It's why the delivery service, the parcel delivery service, called Hermes, their delivery, right, is the messenger of the gods. He was also the protector of travellers, merchants, thieves, and orators. And orators were people who basically would speak at the Senate, speak in the marketplace, people who would orate and communicate. Communication is key here. So travellers, merchants, thieves, and orators. He was regarded as the divine trickster. The divine trickster. So he was sort of the comedy value god. He was very quick in movement, so he was very fast, and he was known as a psychopomp. Now, the psychopomps are the guides of the dead, the underworld. We had the overworld, the underworld. Essentially, the underworld was the sun comes up over there, it traverses across the sky, and it plops down there. Now, this might seem weird to us, but it was quite a brilliant observation that it would go across the sky and plop down there, and tomorrow you go, oh, it's over there again. And they would learn, or they knew, it was the same sun. Because we get educated, we've got evidence and science and research and all the rest of it. But the thing comes up there and goes down over there, and then it's over there again. Where does it go in between? The underworld. It goes under the world. So part of the stories that will then start to emerge in the astrotheology, the stories of the planetary bodies, when it's at midday, they would know the sun is at its highest point in the sky. So it's rising. Then we hit what we would refer to as midday, and now it's descending. Midnight would be the midpoint where it's directly under the earth. So it's entered into the underworld. It reaches midnight. It's gone as far as it can into the underworld. And now the sun is emerging from the underworld and is reborn, and round it goes. Birth, death, resurrection, all that kind of stuff starts getting played out. Now, we've got all the stories about what's happening above, and stories start to build for what happens beneath. And the psychopomps were largely the guides of the dead in the underworld. And psychopomps had two primary functions. One was to act as guides, make sure you got there okay, cross the river Styx and all that kind of stuff. You know, get that way. That's a nice little bit of guidance, but also to keep you there. Because the last thing you want is, like, you just buried Granny. I'm sorry for your loss. I mean, awkward. And she is back again. 2 weeks later, oh, there's Granny. She's come back from the dead. There was some fantastic series made. The French version was far, far better. I can't for the life of me remember what it's called. It's basically all the dead people start coming back. And the Americans remade it. It was pretty good. It just didn't have the atmosphere that the French one did. In the edit, I'll bring up the name for that one. So he was a psychopomp as well. So he conducts the souls in the afterlife. Now, as a deity, Hermes was very much involved in things like divination, or teach divination, magic, sacrifices, and initiation. Now, sacrifice was basically offering something to the god in order to create benefit. What else we got? Symbolically, he would have the winged sandals. So wings on his feet. Remember that one? Wings on his feet. Symbolically, the palm tree was attributed to Hermes. The rooster was, the goat, the tortoise, the number 4. And the winged helmet also. And his main symbol is that of the caduceus, or caduceus, which is often used in the symbol for medicine. And you see it on the side of ambulances and stuff like that. Okay, so the origins, the chances are very probable. The god Pan, who was one of the few gods that when he died, he stayed dead. Just one of those weird little things. Most of the gods who die, they come back. And they have all sorts of resurrection stories and that kind of stuff. Pan was one of the very few that when he died, well, that's the end of Pan. Bye, Pan. Pan being very much about the progenitor. So it was basically the will, the lust for life, that kind of stuff, and all the stuff that comes out of that. And Hermes is believed to be derived from that of Pan. That's an aside, really. It's not really too relevant to this one. Now, what is the sphere of Hod Kabbalistically? It is said it is the sphere in which, or the sphere of consciousness in which the magician operates. This is very much attributed in here as very much things like medicine, healing, the sciences, knowledge, communication. Again, very similar to all the attributions to Hermes. And Kabbalistically, that's Hod. And so in personal development aspects of the magical journey that people go through as magicians, most people stop here and don't really progress beyond, because they become magicians, quite happy with the ego gains that brings them, and don't really progress further up the grades. Because there's certain things you then have to start giving up and abandoning, things that you work hard towards, and then all that work got you here, you don't need to do that anymore, we're going to do something else now. It's like, what? People don't like to give stuff up. So that's usually the place for where the magician stops. Okay, so now we go to the Roman god Mercury. Now, again, this is where the planet was named after. Mercury is the same god as Hermes. Here was the thing about the Roman gods. They stole them all from the Greeks. And so there are some subtle cultural differences between the Greek gods and the Roman gods. But the Romans largely lifted wholesale all of the Greek gods, renamed most of them, and then carried them on in their own Roman traditions. If we look at Mercury, so it's a major god in, I'm just reading from Wikipedia here. Etymology, this is the key bit. The name Mercury possibly related to the Latin word merx, which means merchandise, merchant, commerce, mercare, which is to trade, mercies, which actually means wages. And you'll find merchant as well as where you find MER is usually relating to trade or movement. And that's coming from Hermes and Mercury. That's where these words come from. And so this is where largely the mythology, the astrotheologies and that kind of stuff has actually influenced and shaped the language that we use too. So Mercury is the same god, offering pretty much the same stuff. Lots of healing things going on. Also a trickster, divination, magic, sacrifice, and initiation. It's the same god, just wholesale lifted and then exhibited in a different culture. So we now have Hod, which in the Jewish tradition has all the qualities of Hermes. We have Hermes, which is Greek, and we also now have Mercury, which is Roman, and they all pretty much have the same thing. Now we can come to Hanuman. Hanuman being the monkey god of the Hindus. Now, if you ever go to a Hanuman temple, of which there's a main one in Delhi, in New Delhi, just off Connaught Place. And if you ever go to Delhi, I highly recommend you go there on one of the Hanuman festival days, which I believe is Thursdays and Saturdays, but I might have that wrong. One of the interesting things to me outside the temple is the amount of people that go down there and get street tattoos. Literally, you get street dentists and you get street tattooists. But most of the people having their tattoos are elderly women. And so all around the temple, there's all these tattoo artists. A lot of people doing henna, but all of them out over the needle guns and all the rest of it, tattooing all these old ladies with their various religious insignia and magical epithets and all that kind of stuff. Fantastic. It's just an amazing scene to go and see. It's one of those things that would be quite shocking, I think, over here in the UK. Now, if you look at, let's pull up a picture of Hanuman. You'll see he's got wings on his feet. He can fly. He's quick-witted. He is also a trickster. He is also involved with thieves. This thing, what monkeys are like. I mean, in India, I saw a man get robbed by monkeys. He was with me and a few others. We were coming back from the market. He had a bag full of bananas, and he'd separated from us, and a big monkey stopped him on the street, and the monkey just squares up to him and goes, "Give me your bananas." And like a fool, he went, "No, not giving you my bananas." We're shouting, "Give him the bananas." Monkey's going, "Give me the bananas." It's a Danish guy. He's like, "No," and he holds the bananas above his head. At that cue, the monkey, the chief monkey who sat there in front of him, gives a squawk, and on that command, 1,000 monkeys descend on him and basically rip him to bits and take his bananas. We had to take him to the hospital. He was in quite a bad way. Not a pretty sight, has to be said. So monkeys, think about the qualities of monkeys. They're quick-witted. They're cheeky. They are thieves. They are also the tricksters as well. And guess what? We start to find very, very similar archetypes, very similar attributes, to the archetype that is exhibited within Hod. And guess what colour Hanuman is? He's orange. Voila. It's also orange. There are so many synchronicities. Now, the suggestion is Hinduism evolved in India. Qabalism, Judaism, evolved in ancient Egypt. They were the slave class of ancient Egypt. Didn't have much connection with each other. And yet, when you start looking at some of the archetypal expressions, you start to find the same thing emerging. So we have a flying monkey god who is also a trickster as well. Now it starts to get really peculiar, because we also have the archangel Michael. Some people call him Michael. Some people, especially in ritual, will refer to him as Michael, or it's Michael. And the archangel Michael, guess what he does? Michael is the communicator of the gods. So he's a messenger. He also speaks on behalf of the Jewish people when God's making some decisions that basically don't really favor the ancient Israelites, the ancient Hebrews. Is Michael that goes, hey, God, let's not do that. These are good people. You better change your mind. He spoke up on their behalf. And he is the might of God. So in Revelations, he fights against the armies of Satan, and he speaks on behalf of the populace. And in magick, Michael is the archangel that you utilize in order to pass messages to deity. And so essentially, Michael is the messenger of the gods and the messenger for man to the gods as well. In the magic triangle of Goetia, Michael's name is spelled out in the middle of that triangle. So there's that similarity. Now we also have in ancient Egypt Thoth. Now it is not pronounced Thoth. Everyone says Thoth. It is more like Tahuti, but it's not pronounced like that either. It's more. I'm not even going to try. I think most people just make up the ancient Egyptian. They don't really know either. The people who think they know, who knows? Because I don't think anyone does. Now, Thoth, as we shall now refer to him, is the scribe of the god. He's represented by the quill, or the feather, and he very much is the messenger of the gods. He is also the recorder of knowledge. He teaches wisdom and communication and trade and all of those other things that we have also had here. So within ancient Egypt, we have Thoth as an archetype that also expresses a lot of the qualities we've already got. So it is said that Thoth, Mercury, and Hermes are the same god, just expressed in different traditions. Hanuman is not the same, but has a lot of the same qualities. You'll find similar expressions of the same thing in other things like archangels and the three wise men. In the Jesus story of Jesus' birth in the Nativity, three wise men appear. Now, not a great deal of information is given about the three wise men. They're often referred to as three kings or three wise men. That's not what the original texts refer to them as. The original text refers to them as magi, as magicians. They are magicians from the foreign lands. And guess what? They're the travelers. They have traveled a long way following the stars. Guess what's taught by all of the gods we've referenced so far? Knowledge of the stars, astronomy, and astrology. And so the same type of archetypal expression finds its way into the Nativity too, but only if you read the original text. The very high probability is those three wise men, the three kings, were Zoroastrians. And so that's, again, you get a little hint of that in there. So here's what we've got. Hod is sort of the filing cabinet, which itself has preloaded set of conditions that says, okay, this is about magic, it is about healing, it's about knowledge, the sciences, medicine, and astrology, all of those things. When you take your third degree initiation, those are the things you start to study in magical orders and societies. We then start to find very strong parallels with various god forms across traditions. And they are built into stories. They are nods towards that archetype without necessarily encompassing every single detail to be the same thing. Now, our modern day expression of these archetypes, they have started to divide out into some very interesting areas. So you'll find the caduceus on the side of ambulances. But you also find some interesting things with the court jester of the medieval ages or the stand-up comedian of today. So if we just go back to the court jester of days of old, they were the fool, they were the trickster, they were the joker, but they were actually recruited from the educated classes. The court jester wasn't an idiot. He was one of the most intelligent people that the court of the king was able to find. They played the role of the idiot. Because essentially they were allowed to say things. They could satirize things. They could give commentary upon stuff. They could give feedback directly to the king and to the king's court that no one else was allowed to say. The jester, by doing it through the act of a fool, was given protected status in giving commentary. Because there's a lot of truth that can be said when you make people laugh about it. It's funny because it's true. So the jester was also an archetype of the trickster. The jester also, as a learned person, learned man, would also know things like the sciences, the medicines of the day, would know things like astrology. He would also be the person who would be the court astrologer, and so on. Guess what? The court jester, the trickster, embodied all the qualities that we have so far got with Hod. Now we scroll forward to our modern era, we have the stand-up comedian. Now, comedy is one of those areas that's of interest to me in terms of what gets popular and what works. If we look on things like Twitter, what amazes me is how more seriously people will take their comedians than they will their politicians. And there's an irony there. The politicians are usually regarded as clowns. I certainly regard our current politicians as a bunch of clowns. But people will quote people like some of the I won't name anybody. Some of the comedians who are very edgy and quite awful with some of the things they say, and some of the people they pick on and humiliate. And yet we grant them great wisdom because often they are very intelligent, very educated people. And so when they give commentary and give advice on how, or suggestions on how things should be done politically, or animal rights, for example, or there's all sorts of things that are happening now politically in the world, their commentary is taken a lot more seriously. They are the court jester of the current day. Now, they're not necessarily going to be astrologers and mystics and scientists and healers, but they will be highly educated people. And they are also fulfilling the role of trickster. Because when things are dressed up in comedy, people can take it. They shining a light on very dark matter in a way that makes people laugh, makes the darkness easier to bear and to look at, or look into. And so the court jester and the stand-up comedian is very much an embodiment of that. And then we'll also find other threads, and I'm going to do a separate video on specifically on this one, is when you start looking at the Punch and Judy show. And the role of Punch, he's a really obnoxious character, Punch. He's a wife batterer, he's a thief, he's just awful. And yet, it came out of the Puritan era. So after Oliver Cromwell's era of Puritanism, where essentially they were the Taliban of the day. Anything that reeked of fun was illegal and could get you in big trouble. At the end of that reign, people came out and started partying a lot more. And the Punch and Judy show was very much a commentary on a lot of the social mores at the time. And so, and it endured for generation upon generation. And thank God it's finally dying out, because it's just awful. I mean, as a child going to see Punch and Judy, it's like, oh no, there's Punch and Judy on the beach. No, don't make me. And so it was something I never liked. However, when we start to analyze the script, the original script of Punch and Judy, because believe it or not, there is actually a script, and look at the character formation of each of those characters, and believe it or not, there was a time when the Punch and Judy man was trained in those character formations and all the rest of it. There's actually a depth of character to this squeaky thing. That's the way to do it. It is also the trickster as well. It is the same thing, same archetype, finding an expression through a different way. And so again, it is sold as, it was a political commentary that was sold as entertainment. It wasn't really made for children. The original Punch and Judy is pretty brutal. It got tamed down in later Victorian eras and onwards. But the original one was pretty brutal, and it was very much political commentary of the time. So I think, there's probably a lot more detail, but I'm trying to do it all from memory. That's what we have with Hod, plus there's a whole lot more as well. So in looking at the trickster archetype, let's just summarize what the trickster is. Quick-witted, highly educated, has knowledges of the sciences as well as the esoteric arts, of things like particularly astrology and movement of planetary bodies. Now, within that, of course, there'll be an understanding of the stories of the underworld, and so it'd be knowledge of what is essentially religion. The flight is not so much you can fly through the sky. It's not so much that. It's about swiftness of movement. So quick-witted and quick to move, quick to act, quick to react. It's one of those things about comedians. I look at them on the panel shows, and something gets said, and people come back with such quick wit. You think, that's got to be scripted. No, it's not. They really are that quick-witted. Me, I can come back with a funny, but give me a couple of days to think about it. And so that very much is the embodiment of that's the wings on the feet or the wings on the hat. And the other one is they have high command of language and oration, narration, and communication. As communicators of the gods, they speak a divine truth. And that's ultimately what that metaphor is actually about. They're speaking a true truth, as opposed to something you'll get off the BBC, which is kind of a bit maybe true, but it's filtered through a whole load of corporate bias and all the rest of it. And so the divine truth is actually hard truth that no one can disagree with. And then by dressing it up in a trickster way, in a comedy way, of course, people will be more accepting of that. And that's why comedians can get away with saying things that no one else can, because they're a comedian, so it's allowed. Now, what's interesting here is the backlash against comedy. So now, with our political correct movement that's happening, communication, so free speech being a very high value that people have held for a long time, now with progressive liberal political values questioning a lot of the old ways, the deplatforming and the banning of people to communicate, the imposition of political rules and legislation upon communication, and the restriction of what people can say in the guise of comedy or in any, there's all these banned words and all these now taboo subjects that were somebody to express, there's only two genders. Well, you could find yourself prosecuted for a hate crime by expressing something that is actually maybe a scientific fact, or not, or an arguable point, but it doesn't matter anymore because that's now speaking against a protected class. So therefore, it's a potential hate crime. So what we are now seeing is an interesting movement against this particular archetype. Now, the question is, what is that an archetype of? I'll do that in the next video, because that is where, for me, this gets really, really interesting, is what is it? What archetype is being expressed now through those liberal progressive values? If you have any thoughts on this, if you have any ideas what it might be, stick it in the comment section. I'll do this in my next video, which I'll probably do in a few weeks, so it won't be coming up immediately. And any other thoughts or questions on this particular subject of HOD, of the books that I've given, stick them in the comment section, because it just helps me formulate what it is people want to know about and what I will blather on about in the next video.